Back to Fresh Outlook, I'm TWB. In just a moment, we're going to discuss President Obama's fifth State of the Union address. But first, we have some new panelists we'd like to introduce, some new faces. Let's begin with Osame. Tell us who you are, where you're from,
Hello.
and why'd you decide to join us?
Yes, my name is Osame Tuniger, and I'm a producer here at Ebru TV. And I just wanted to come here and chat with you guys a little bit.
We're so happy to have you.
Definitely.
I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Fletcher, new face.
I'm Fletcher Harper. I'm an Episcopal priest and executive director of Green Faith, which is an interfaith environmental coalition.
Terrific. Excellent. And finally, Dr. Rossi.
I'm a political psychologist. I like to talk about world leaders, politicians, how they come across, how their message is resonating or not.
Terrific. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. But first, President Obama's State of the Union speech took place this past Tuesday. Let's take a look.
The President of the United States.
During his first State of the Union address since winning re-election, President Obama tackled what is at the forefront of many Americans' minds: a strong economy.
It is our unfinished task to restore the basic bargain that built this country. The idea that if you work hard and meet your responsibilities, you can get ahead, no matter where you come from, no matter what you look like or who you love.
While the economy has been a persistent issue since the president first took office, he highlighted the accomplishments of his first term as far as recovering from a crippling recession. However, he acknowledged that more work needed to be done and urged Congress to not let their differences hinder that effort.
It is our unfinished task to make sure that this government works on behalf of the many and not just the few.
Though he spent the majority of his time on domestic issues, he also briefly touched on foreign policy, namely offering more specifics about the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan.
We have brought home 33,000 of our brave servicemen and women. This spring, our forces will move into a support role, while Afghan security forces take the lead. Tonight, I can announce that over the next year, another 34,000 American troops will come home from Afghanistan. This drawdown will continue, and by the end of next year, our war in Afghanistan will be over.
All in all, I thought he did a great job. By the way, 33.5 million people watched this State of the Union speech, the lowest, the most least watched of all of his speeches. Just a quick tidbit for you. I thought this was a more conciliatory speech than his inauguration speech. What stood out for me, just they deserve a vote. They deserve a vote. The gun control aspect, where he specifically named people in the audience, Gabby Giffords.
Idea Pendleton.
Yes. That for me was extremely powerful, and I feel like he got his message across. The best way to do it. What stood out for you?
Actually, same thing stood out for me, the issue on gun control, and particularly the fact that he mentioned Idea Pendleton, the 15-year-old African-American girl who sang at the inauguration, who was a part of the at the inauguration. Then after a week was gunned down at a park, totally caught in the middle of gang violence. And this has been going on for many years, but we have never engaged gun violence when it was a particular issue for inner cities. Now that with Sandy Hook, it became a major issue. So I was very happy to see President to connect the fact that gun violence affects all of us.
Absolutely.
You know, all different strata with relation to race and social economic.
I thought the whole thing impressed me. I thought that the president really projected himself as a winning personality, and I think he did it in a way which shows that he's moving where the country's moving. And he's, whether it be troop withdrawal, whether guns in America, I think he's projecting himself very well in terms of where this country wants to go.
He's talking about what we're talking about.
Exactly.
We should have him on the show.
Tapping onto the pulse of the country.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
One thing
Fletcher,
I found encouraging was that for the second time recently, he spoke prominently and specifically about addressing climate change. I mean, this is arguably one of the biggest issues facing not only our country but the world. It's gotten close to zero political attention over the last several years, and both in his inaugural and then in the State of the Union address, it was a featured topic, and I think that's hopeful.
Right, and he had a very long quote about these aren't freak occurrences, Hurricane Sandy and all these wildfires. We need to do something about it. And he was pretty, he said pretty direct. He said, if Congress doesn't act, I will. So the question is, Fletcher, I know you specialize in this a little bit. Is he going to act? I mean, especially in the next segment, we're going to be talking about this Keystone Pipeline, talking about our dependence on energy in the Middle East. We want to get away from that, but we also want to reduce our carbon emissions. So it seems like a little bit of a conflict of interest here, how he's going to be able to do both.
And he's put himself in a bit of a difficult spot because he's said consistently that he favors an all-of-the-above approach to energy policy. Right. And unfortunately, from the perspective of scientists who sort of
you have to go one way or the other.
Who look at the issue of growing greenhouse gas emissions, that just really isn't an option. I mean, we look at the clear data that shows the increasing occurrence of severe storms, the loss of life, the loss of property. That's what climate change makes happen. And so there's a choice. I think, to his credit, he has done things. In his first administration, the EPA was able to raise the fuel efficiency standards for automobiles significantly, and that was a real plus. The challenge is, when is the Congress going to be willing to act? Because essentially what the president can do without the Congress is limited to a certain amount of stuff by executive order and through regulation. We've got to get towards the legislature.
You think this Congress is going to act? I mean,
if I could interject on this, I think this whole thing with climate is fascinating from my point of view as a psychologist, because I think the people who are not for climate are really problematic individuals in terms of looking at the president. They're people who are so extreme that they don't want to give the president or anybody who's trying to make sense on climate credit. They just want to take a hard. They don't want no compromise. They really have a bias and a prejudice, and they're going to hang on to it even in the face of evidence from all of the scientists. It doesn't matter. If there's one scientist in a million, they'll take that one that's going against. And they're doing it for a reason, because of their own biases and prejudices related to politics, not just climate.
And what we've seen consistently, back in December, Green Faith did a project where we did an email campaign in support of renewing some subsidies for wind power, modest subsidies for wind power. We emailed 9 million evangelical and Catholic Christians throughout the Midwest and a certain number of Rocky Mountain states. Found very, very strong support for that among voting blocs that would normally be considered to be conservative.
Right.
The messengers that we used for that were retired military leaders and evangelical pastors. So, a lot of this is about the cultural issue. A lot of it, when people are given the facts and given a chance to decide, they do the right thing.
So is it more important than who's giving the message as opposed to what the message is?
I think it's a combination of who's giving the message, how it's framed. That just having a message framed from a sort of deep green kind of perspective isn't going to win a majority of.
What did you think about the John McCain, Joe Lieberman sort of?
Well, nine years ago, I thought it would have been wonderful. I mean, I think the problem is that now we're 9 years down the road and nothing has happened. I mean, we're almost alone among developed nations in terms of not having climate legislation. And so, would I welcome it? Sure, but that's not going to be enough. I mean, at this point, the science is clear that if we want to avoid really catastrophic change on the order of 20 to 40 foot sea level rises, which will make a lot of major cities around the world uninhabitable, then we're going to have to do that.
What do we have to do? If you were president, what would be the major things to get
You've got to commit on a national level to reducing carbon emissions 80% by the year 2050. You've got to make a major investment in ramping up renewable energy, wind, solar, biomass, research on that.
And 80%, you said carbon emission, 40% of that is from oil production. But one catch-2020 is president cannot alone call the shot when it comes to Keystone Pipeline, which we'll talk later on. Because it's Congress who, because it's across the border, it will be the Congress who's going to call the shot at the end, which is going to be more challenging.
Let's segue. We've spent a lot of time talking about climate change, but just some other highlights and lowlights maybe of the speech. He talked a lot about raising, or significantly about raising the federal minimum wage to $9 an hour. To me, that's still pretty low, given what rents are. I mean, is that the solution? I mean, it's great that we want to increase, but it's just not enough. What did you think of that?
It's not enough, and most of the research shows that if people get more money, they're more productive, it's better for our economy. The psychology of this works better for everyone if the minimum wage is at a certain level. But again, like climate, this is an argument by those on the far right that just want to put down the president, put down anybody else as being very liberal, almost like you're being extremely liberal by going to your $9. I mean, it's really kind of hard to.
And the funny thing is, there was a piece right after the speech, which was talking about in the Huffington Post, which was talking about scientifically saying a normal minimum wage that would make anybody, at living standard would be somewhere around $22.
Right.
Which is.
So we have to, we have to at least double it. What did you think?
Ideally, hopefully.
Well, in addition to supporting it. I also think that what's good is it's starting to put on the table this topic of income inequality, which has gotten to really dangerous levels in our society at this point. I mean, there was a study that came out in the paper this morning that showed that during the recent recession, the incomes of the top 1% of society went up about 11%, while the rest of the country, the other 99%, lost a little bit less than 1%. I mean, this gap is continuing to increase. It's not good for society. It's not good. You know, more and more, this is a country where people who are born into poverty stay poor. That's not what America is about.
And sadly, with penal code, when you're on the lower echelon of income, generally, if you cross the line, you generally serve much longer sentences. But if you're on the upper echelon, you generally somehow find ways to serve much less prison time. So it's even worse when you,
let's take a look just a little bit more on what President Obama talked about during his speech. Take a look.
President Barack Obama's first State of the Union address of his second term and the Republican response by rising GOP star Senator Marco Rubio showed just how deeply entrenched each side remains in its long-held positions. It all forecasts for continued political dysfunction in Washington. Obama said his proposals to increase spending on manufacturing, infrastructure, and clean energy technologies would be fully paid for, though he did not specify how he would offset the cost of his proposals. Rubio said the nation needs a balanced budget amendment to curb spending and says one way to help the economy grow is for the U.S. to attract the best professionals.
We can also help grow our economy if we have a legal immigration system that allows us to attract and assimilate the world's best and brightest. We need a responsible, permanent solution to the problem of those who are here illegally. But first, we must follow through on the broken promises of the past to secure our borders and enforce our laws.
Marco Rubio is a 41-year-old Cuban American. He's one of the party's brightest stars and a possible 2016 presidential candidate.
So, Mr. President, I don't oppose your plans because I want to protect the rich. I oppose your plans because I want to protect my neighbors. Hardworking, middle-class Americans who don't need us to come up with a plan to grow the government.
In his fourth State of the Union address and seventh speech to a joint sitting of Congress, Obama challenged legislators on Tuesday night to join him in taking on, quote, our generation's task to ignite the growth of a rising, thriving middle class.
All right, we actually have to go to break now, but when we come back, we're going to react to Marco Rubio's reaction. Stay with us. You're watching Fresh Outlook.